I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you. This week in the news, the European Union announces 140 million euros in additional funding to Armenia to accelerate reforms. The Minister of Economy says Armenia is already feeling the effects of the conflict in Iran. The central bank warns the conflict in the Middle East could push inflation up by 1.7%. And EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says Russia has already begun targeting Armenia ahead of its elections using tactics similar to those seen in Moldova, but Moscow has launched its efforts much earlier this time. Tune in to our weekly podcast of the news with me, Rubina Margosian. The European Union will provide Armenia with 140 million euros in additional funding to accelerate reforms, strengthen democratic institutions, and advance visa liberalization with the EU. This is in addition to the 270 million euros resilience and growth plan announced in 2024. The announcement was made by the EU Enlargement Commissioner, Marta Kos, during her visit to Yerevan this week, where she met with Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Deputy Prime Minister Meher Grigoryan. In a social media post, Kos said Armenia and the EU have never been closer, adding that at a time of crisis in the Middle East, our relationship and the work towards peace in the South Caucasus have become even more important for trade and energy links to Asia. In Yerevan, Kos also met with the Interior Minister, Arpine Sargsyan, praising progress towards visa liberalization. A progress report, by the way, on the implementation of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan is expected to be presented in the beginning of May at the EU-Armenia summit in Yerevan. Armenia opened its first resident embassy in Oman this week, the first Arab state to establish diplomatic relations with Armenia just months after Armenia's independence. Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan, who was in Muscat for the ceremony, discussed a range of bilateral issues with his Omani counterpart and emphasized the importance of lifting visa requirements and launching direct flights between the two countries. On the sidelines of the visit, Mirzoyan also met with Oman's Ministers of Agriculture and Water Resources, Transport and IT, as well as the chairman of the Oman Investment Authority. In Muscat, Minister Mirzoyan also chaired a meeting of Armenian ambassadors accredited to the Arab countries to discuss the current situation in the Middle East and to address issues affecting Armenian citizens there, including efforts to facilitate their return to Armenia. Just a recap, in recent years, Armenia has opened embassies in Uruguay, Switzerland, Cyprus, and an office in Luxembourg. Armenia has also declared its intention to open embassies in Serbia, Hungary, and South Korea. These are countries that we had diplomatic relations with, but no embassies at. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova criticized remarks made by the Armenian Prime Minister at the European Parliament last week. Zakharova said the Armenian government portrays EU standards and the European path as an unconditional good, ignoring what she described as the deep crisis in the European Union, declining industrial output, raising public debt, and migration pressures. She warned that closer alignment could have economic consequences for Armenia, underlying the higher energy prices in Europe as a main factor. She stressed that Armenia's economy remains closely tied to the EAEU, the Eurasian Economic Union, where she noted Armenia is a full rule-making member, whereas Yerevan has no role in shaping European guidelines. She added that Russia expects Armenia to either uphold its EAEU commitments and avoid creating obstacles for Russian businesses or clarify its position. She also addressed Pashinyan's comments about clergy allegedly linked to Soviet-era security services, suggesting they were aimed at pro-Western audiences, and she described it as an anti-Soviet and increasingly Russophobic comment. Armenia's Justice Minister Surpi Galyan said this week that the draft of the new constitution will not be published in March as previously announced, and cited ongoing intense discussions with civil society as a reason for the delay. She said a revised timeline for publishing the draft will be announced at a later stage. Galyan addressed the issue of the preamble, which includes a reference to the Declaration of Independence, which Azerbaijan does not like. She noted that deliberations are continuing both with the Constitutional Reform Council and the ruling political team in regards to the preamble, and no final decision has been made regarding if there will be a new preamble or not, not or how it would be formulated. Pashinyan also addressed constitutional reforms this week during a press briefing, calling the process a strategic priority. He noted that the Constitutional Commission has held meetings, although attendance has been inconsistent. Constitutional Reform Council member Daniel Ionisyan said a significant portion of the draft has not been discussed by the Council. He said a number of proposals as well as key issues remain unaddressed. He listed key issues in need of deliberation, among them the issue of regulating constitutional amendments, internet freedom, the independence of anti-corruption and statistical bodies, electoral processes, the status of the church, and the role of the Constitutional Court in electoral disputes. Ionisyan acknowledged attendance as a problem, but said some of the most frequent absentees are members of Pashinyan's own team. And the legal team of the Catholicos has petitioned Armenia's investigative committee to lift or ease his travel restrictions so that he can attend the funeral of Ilya II, the Catholicos Patriarch of the Georgian Orthodox Church, who died earlier this week. Garegin II was placed under a travel ban in mid-February of this year for failing to comply with a court order to reinstate the primate of the Masyazotan diocese. And more church news, Archbishop Abraham Mugurchan has been relieved of the office of the Vayotzor primate and called to retirement. As per his request, the Mother See said this week Mugurchan was among the bishops who demanded the Catholicos' resignation last November. In a separate development, the house arrest of Bishop Mugurdic Prosyan, the primate of the Aragazotan diocese, has been lifted and replaced with administrative supervision and a travel ban. Prosyan is a pending trial and is charged with obstructing electoral rights and coercing participation in gatherings by abusing official authority. Meanwhile, a court rejected a request to lift the house arrest of Shirak Diocese Primate Archbishop Mikhail Ajabahian, but allowed him to attend church services. Ajabahian's defense lawyers argued that 1/3 of his sentence has already been served and cited good conduct as grounds for his release. Ajabahian was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for publicly calling for the overthrow of the government, but was later placed under house arrest due to health complications. And Armenia's central bank governor, Martin Galistyan, warned this week that the conflict in the Middle East could push inflation up by 1.2 to 1.7% in Armenia. Key risks include rising oil prices, logistical disruptions or higher costs for alternative import and export routes, declining exports to Middle Eastern markets, and partial disruption of food imports from Iran. Economy Minister Gevorg Papoyan separately told the parliamentary committee that Armenia is already feeling the effects of the conflict in Iran, particularly through higher prices of certain goods and raw materials used in local production. And so Armenia and most of the world. And the Armenian government will increase housing support for forcibly displaced Artsakh Armenians, raising per-person assistance for home acquisition in settlements near Yerevan from 3 million drams to 4 million drams. This is going from $8,000 to $10,000. Adding that there are no plans to increase support for housing in Yerevan, as the government aims to direct the program towards the regions. The Prime Minister announced this at a conference discussing issues facing Armenians displaced from Artsakh. Ruben Vartanyan's family said he was prevented from delivering a public address to Azerbaijan's ombudsperson during a phone call on March 13, which they said was intentionally interrupted. Vartanyan's family has released the audio recording where Vartanyan can be heard being cut off as he attempts to deliver the appeal. In a statement, the family said the attempt was a last resort after 10 days of unsuccessful efforts to reach the ombudsperson through legal requests and phone calls. They added that although the trials concluded about a month ago, neither Vartanyan nor other Armenian detainees have received any official verdicts in any language and remain unaware of any transfer plans. Vartanyan's wife, Veronika Zonabend, also appealed to the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, asking for clarification regarding the legal status of Armenian detainees in Azerbaijan. She said they kept being labeled terrorists, but the detainees and their families are not even informed if legally they are considered prisoners of war, security detainees, internees, or fall under any other category of international humanitarian law, saying this would help families understand their situation. And on to our elections section, the Elections Digest. Armenian government institutions lack sufficient resources to counter Russian hybrid threats and the corruption of political actors ahead of the upcoming elections. The McCain Institute said this in an assessment released this week. The US-based nonprofit conducted a mission to Armenia last month to evaluate the electoral environment and identify risks to the integrity of the vote, aiming to inform policymakers here in Armenia and the public in the United States. The report also states that the Armenian Apostolic Church, led by Catholicos Garegin II, is a pivotal political player in the pre-election period and is actively campaigning against Prime Minister Pashinyan. The institute warned that, as in Moldova, Russian hybrid warfare is expected to pose a significant threat to Armenia's ability to hold free and fair elections, including through spreading of misleading narratives about the peace process that could influence voter behavior. The institute issued recommendations to Armenian authorities as well as US and European governments. For Armenian authorities, it recommended establishing an electoral interagency task force to enable a rapid response to electoral risks, enhancing cooperation between the Central Electoral Commission and the Ministry of Internal Affairs in investigating allegations for transportation of and payment to Armenian citizens abroad to vote. It also called on Western partners to increase technical assistance, funding, and training, and to deepen intelligence cooperation with Armenia to counter foreign hybrid interference, but also to enact personal and financial sanctions for known pro-Russian operatives in Armenia, prepare for the potential contestation of results, as well as for how to ensure that whichever party forms Armenia's next government continues to pursue the country's democratic trajectory. Meanwhile, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said Russia has already begun targeting Armenia ahead of the elections using tactics similar to those used in Moldova. Speaking at a conference on countering foreign information manipulation, Kallas said Moscow had launched its efforts much earlier this time, more than a year in advance. She added that governments must investigate, criminalize, and prosecute interference, including vote buying and information manipulation, while clearly presenting the facts to the public. Kallas also said that the EU's hybrid rapid response team will be in Armenia in April. The decision was initially announced in February. We did not know where they would be arriving. She said the EU would not leave Armenia to face foreign interference alone. And Prime Minister Pashinyan said this week that he expects that his political force will ensure a constitutional majority in the June 7th election, which he argued would make progress on regional peace irreversible. He accused unnamed opposition forces of effectively advocating for war with Azerbaijan by calling to revise the peace agenda, warning this could lead to renewed conflict potentially soon after the election and with risks to both territory and sovereignty. Pashinyan also suggested some opposition figures do not fully understand their own statements, claiming parts of their messaging was written elsewhere. He said those forces seek to keep Armenia in a dependent position. And Armenia's second president, Robert Kocharian, will lead the Armenia Alliance as its candidate for prime minister in the upcoming parliamentary elections, running under the slogan, "Together we can." Sounds a little bit too familiar. The slogan maybe reminds of Obama's "Yes, we can," maybe a more clumsier version. Well, Kocharian said his goal is to defend the evil that this government embodies and hold those guilty of the deaths of thousands of Armenian heroes and those who surrendered Artsakh accountable. He said security will remain a top priority. Armenia needs a combat-ready army, a strong leader, and a powerful ally so that all threats can be neutralized with joint forces. He also pledged to pursue a predictable, understandable foreign policy and reject the option of playing on the contradictions of the greater powers. Kocharian said he supports peace with Azerbaijan, but only with concrete security guarantees. This is especially important, he said, in the conditions when the power of law in the world has been replaced by the law of power. He promised to improve public administration, attract investment, and create up to 45,000 jobs annually, and sharply increase pensions. Kochayan urged voters to choose a candidate who offers experience and capacity to ensure security and economic development. And the investigative committee has given Samvel Karapetyan permission to publish a video message on Facebook to present his party's political activities, programs, and positions. His party had previously published AI-generated video messages attributed to him. Now he will get a chance to address the public via video. In a separate development, Armenia's investigative committee said a criminal case has been launched in the Lori region over alleged obstruction of electoral rights through threats of violence. According to investigators, a married couple visited an individual's home on March 9 and threatened violence and property damage to coerce the person into joining the Our Way movement. This is the movement that's affiliated with Samvel Karapetyan's Strong Armenia party, and vote for it in the June 7 election. Authorities said the suspects also threatened to destroy the individual's apartment and stage it as an accident if their demands were not met. Both have been charged. One has been placed in pretrial detention, while the other has been released under travel restrictions, bail, and administrative supervision. The investigation is ongoing. And that was all for this week, other than the parts when we talk briefly about our articles. What we published this week: we published a piece by Olesya Vartanian, part of her column Beyond Borders. It's titled Where Pashinyan is Right and Where He May Be Mistaken About Georgia. It's about the same European Parliament speech that Zakharova was referencing earlier in our podcast, but this time the author speaks about the Armenian Prime Minister's call for renewed political dialogue between Georgia and the EU. While the appeal underscores the importance of engagement without concrete proposals, it risks adding little to efforts to resolve Georgia's prolonged political crisis. Just a little bit of recap: Pashinyan had said in the European Parliament that resuming dialogue between Georgia and the European Union is very important for Armenia, as Georgia was the country that also paved the way for Armenia's EU ambitions. But Olesya Vartanian is also pointing out that without concrete proposals and how to achieve this, the Prime Minister has said next to nothing. Well, another piece that we published just today by Anush Bekoyan, Democracy and Strategic Capital, Armenia's Path in a Transactional World. Well, the author argues that despite changing Western priorities, democratic governance remains Armenia's most durable asset that will only strengthen its resilience, credibility, and long-term positioning in a fragmented international order. Well, her initial argument starts that, America has changed its worldview, has changed its tactic, and while Europe remains committed to international law and democracy, and Armenia is left in between, and she argues that Armenia should not abandon its democratic path. And this week we published a piece by EVN's own Hovannes Nazaretian. It's called Azerbaijan Continues to Arm Itself While Talking Peace, in a very Hovannes Nazaretian style. He looks into all the arms acquisitions that Azerbaijan has made in the recent years while peace talks have been ongoing, and they're quite significant. And he looks about what this reveals about the fragile balance between diplomacy and deterrence in the South Caucasus. In our creative text section, we published a piece titled Armenia's AI Story is Coming into Focus. It's by the section editor, Ani Toroyan. She says a series of recent announcements, from a major AI factory expansion to plans for a small modular nuclear reactor, suggest that Armenia's technology ambitions are moving beyond rhetoric. Together, they hint at an emerging strategy linking AI infrastructure, energy capacity, and the country's growing innovation ecosystem. And we published a piece finally this week also that's neither security nor tech nor politics. It's in our etc. section. It's a piece by Sorana Garabagosyan. It's called Preserve Cinema Heritage or Let It Go. She talks about the acquisition of Artavas Peleshian's film rights by the German co-production office that promises long-awaited restoration and global distribution, but the deal also expresses a deeper issue: Armenia's lack of cultural policy to protect its cinematic heritage and maintain control over its most significant films. We've seen this happen with Parajanov films and other high film studio films at Heritage as well. And in our Armenian section, we finally translated a piece that I had personally found very interesting. It's by Sofia Bergman. In Armenian, it reads Հայ փախստականը, որ լուսանկարեց Եվրոպայի ներգաղթի դարաշրջանը. It's about this Armenian genocide survivor who ends up in Marseille and opens one of the most important photo studios there. And he knowingly or unknowingly documents the migration at the time of people from across the world and becomes one of the creators of a very important archive in the European history for migration. The studio was called Studio Rex. And it's a story about the curator who acquires the archives, what he discovers in them, how the studio was passed down from generation to generation. And the reason for writing this piece was several publications and exhibitions that were taking place across Europe last year with the photos from his archive. That's all for this week, and we will be back again next week this time.